She thought it was just a peaceful winter walk through the woods. But when the snow began to fall harder and the shadows closed in, she had no idea her life was about to depend on a wild animal she never expected to save her. Winter had wrapped the world in silence. The trees stood tall and bare, their skeletal branches etched against a pale sky, while the ground lay buried beneath a soft, endless blanket of snow. The air was crisp, cold enough to sting the skin, but not so harsh as to keep the more adventurous souls indoors. Among them was Emily, a bright-eyed 14-year-old girl with a love for winter like no other. She had always found comfort in the woods near her family's cabin, a quiet sanctuary far from the noise and rush of the town. Her parents had raised her to respect nature, to admire its beauty, and to understand its dangers. But that morning, the forest seemed especially peaceful. The sky hung low, heavy with unfallen snow, and the world felt as if it had been paused in a perfect, serene moment. Wrapped warmly in her thick winter coat, scarf snug around her neck, Emily stepped out into the shimmering landscape, with her father's words echoing in her mind. "Don't go too far, Em. Weather's turning." She smiled at the memory, reassured by the familiar warning. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she didn't mind. The crunch of her boots on fresh snow was a sound she had always loved. The woods beckoned. Emily followed a narrow trail carved by deer and other woodland creatures, her breath forming little clouds before her. She had walked this path countless times. It wound through a small grove of birches, dipped into a hollow, then rose again toward a frozen stream that sparkled like glass beneath the morning light. Birds chirped overhead, their songs clear and sharp in the winter stillness. For a while, Emily let herself forget everything else. School, chores, the endless news of storms and snowdrifts, it all melted away as she breathed in the crisp air and felt the quiet power of the forest. But nature, as she knew well, could change in an instant. And today, it would. The first sign was the wind. It crept in softly, threading its icy fingers through the trees. Then came the snow, thin at first, like powdered sugar shaken from the clouds. Emily tugged her scarf higher, her gaze lifting toward the sky. Gray clouds had swallowed the blue, and the sun was no more than a faint blur behind them. She hesitated, a flicker of caution rising in her chest. Maybe I should head back, she thought. But when she turned to follow her footprints home, her heart skipped a beat. The path had already begun to fade. Fresh snow covered her tracks, and the swirling wind blurred the familiar shapes of trees and rocks. She felt her pulse quicken. "It's fine," she told herself, forcing a breath. "I know this forest." But the cold was seeping deeper now, and the once familiar trail seemed to twist and shift beneath the falling snow. Emily quickened her pace, scanning the whitewashed landscape for landmarks. The stream should have been close by, but the snow covered everything, erasing the subtle cues she usually relied on. Her breath came faster, clouds of mist rising with every exhale. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, scattering snow from the branches like tiny icy daggers. And then a sound stopped her cold. A low, guttural growl, distant but unmistakable. Emily froze, her eyes wide. She turned slowly, heart pounding against her ribs. There, at the edge of her vision, shadows moved among the trees, gray shapes, blending almost perfectly with the winter world. Wolves. At first, she thought, hoped, they might be strays from a distant pack, uninterested in her presence. But when the largest of them stepped forward, yellow eyes fixed intently on her, she knew better. The wolves had caught her scent. They were hunting. Panic surged through her chest. Emily spun and began to run, her boots sinking deep into the soft snow. The cold bit at her lungs as she gasped for breath, her arms pumping desperately. Behind her, the crunch of paws on snow grew louder, faster, closer. She stumbled over a fallen branch, catching herself just in time, but the wolves were gaining. Her legs burned from the effort, the cold searing her throat with every breath. "Think, Emily, think!" her mind screamed. She scanned the landscape wildly for escape, for shelter, for anything. But the forest was a maze, and the snow blinded her path. The wolves fanned out, moving with terrifying coordination, herding her away from the open ground. Her hope began to fade, until a blur of motion ahead, a towering figure, antlers rising like a crown from its head. An enormous deer, a stag, strong and majestic, stood squarely in her path. For a moment, Emily skidded to a halt, fear tangled with confusion. But the stag wasn't running. It wasn't fleeing like prey. It lowered its head, powerful muscles rippling beneath its winter coat. It pawed at the ground, breath steaming in the frozen air. And then, with explosive force, it charged. Not at her, but at the wolves. Emily could scarcely believe her eyes. The stag crashed into the pack with a fury she hadn't thought possible, antlers swinging like deadly weapons. The wolves scattered, snarling and snapping, but the stag held its ground. It lunged at the nearest predator, driving it back with violent thrusts of its antlers. Snow exploded around them, a flurry of chaos and survival. Emily, frozen in shock, watched as the stag defended her, giving her a chance to escape. The wolf pack, momentarily confused by the sudden resistance, regrouped, but the stag pressed its attack, forcing them farther from their prey. "Run!" Emily's instinct screamed, and this time she obeyed. Her legs, burning with exhaustion, found new strength as she turned and fled. The sounds of battle faded behind her, replaced by the thunder of her own heartbeat. Branches whipped past as she pushed through the woods, ignoring the sting of the cold, the ache in her muscles. Somewhere ahead, safety waited. She just had to reach it. As Emily burst from the tree line into a snow-covered clearing, her eyes caught movement once more. Bright orange jackets, voices calling her name. Searchers. Relief flooded her chest, warm and overwhelming. "Here!" she cried, her voice hoarse but desperate. Several rescuers turned, their faces lighting up with disbelief and joy. They sprinted toward her, helping her to her knees as the fear and adrenaline drained from her body. "Are you hurt?" they asked, checking her over, brushing snow from her coat. She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, part frozen, part hot with relief. "There was a stag," she gasped. "It saved me. It fought them off." The rescuers exchanged uncertain glances, but one of them pointed toward the tree line. There, distant but unmistakable, stood the silhouette of the great deer. Its breath plumed in the cold air, and for a heartbeat, its eyes met Emily's. Then, as silently as it had come, it turned and vanished into the white woods. Emily's breath came in ragged, trembling gasps as the searchers surrounded her, brushing snow from her cheeks and shoulders. Her legs gave out beneath her, folding like brittle sticks, and she collapsed into the arms of one of the rescuers. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice tight with relief. Behind him, others scanned the tree line, eyes narrowed against the falling snow. They had heard her words. A stag. It fought them off. But they weren't sure what to believe. Still, the urgency of the moment demanded their focus. First, they had to get the girl home. Carefully, they wrapped Emily in a thick emergency blanket, its bright orange fabric almost glowing against the white landscape. Her body shivered uncontrollably, her lips pale and cracked. But she was alive, and that was nothing short of a miracle. As the rescuers carried her back along the path to safety, Emily found herself glancing over her shoulder, searching for any sign of the majestic animal that had saved her. The stag was gone, vanished into the swirling snow as mysteriously as it had appeared. But in her heart, she could still feel its presence. A guardian spirit of the forest. The journey back to the village was slow. Heavy snowfall had covered most of the tracks, and the rescuers had to navigate carefully through drifts that reached their knees. Along the way, they found signs of the struggle. Patches of disturbed snow, deep impressions where hooves had struck hard into the frozen earth, claw marks from the wolves. A chaotic battlefield frozen in time. One of the searchers knelt beside the marks, brushing away the powdery snow. He studied the patterns with wide eyes. "Look at this," he murmured. "It fought them. She wasn't imagining it." Another man shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it," he replied. "A wild animal, defending a human child?" The sight of the evidence turned disbelief into awe. What Emily had said was true. The forest had risen up to protect her. By the time they reached the village, word had already spread that Emily had been found. A crowd gathered at the edge of the main road, bundled in coats and scarves, their faces lined with worry and hope. When they saw her, relief rippled through them like a wave. Her parents pushed to the front, their eyes wide with tears. Her mother let out a sob, rushing forward to wrap Emily in her arms. Her father's voice cracked with emotion as he kissed her forehead, thanking every power he could name for bringing his daughter back alive. "Thank you," Emily whispered hoarsely, her words barely more than a breath. But her eyes were not on her parents. They searched the distant tree line once more, lingering on the dark shadows beneath the pines, as if the stag might still be watching, as if it, too, had made sure she got home safely. Inside the warm embrace of her home, Emily lay wrapped in blankets, a hot cup of tea cradled in her trembling hands. Her mother sat beside her, never letting go of her daughter's hand, as if afraid she might disappear again. Outside, villagers gathered around the searchers, demanding to know what had happened. The rescuers told them everything: the trail of the wolves, the frantic run through the snow, and the unbelievable arrival of the stag. Skepticism turned to astonishment as they described the signs of battle, the prints, and the disturbed snow. News spread quickly beyond the village. Reporters arrived within hours, their cameras and notepads in hand, eager to capture the astonishing tale. Emily, still weak but determined, recounted her story for them. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the terror she felt when she saw the wolves, the hopelessness that crept into her heart as they closed in, and the incredible appearance of the stag. She described its powerful antlers slicing through the air, the way it stood between her and the pack, fearless and unyielding. "I thought it would run," she admitted softly, her gaze distant. "But it didn't. It fought for me." Her story captured the hearts of everyone who heard it. People across the region, and soon the entire country, were moved by the tale of a wild animal rising to defend a lost child. Headlines blazed with wonder. "Deer saves girl from wolf pack. A miracle in the snow." "Forest guardian. Wild stag protects child from predators." "Nature's unexpected hero." Experts weighed in, offering cautious explanations. Some suggested that the wolves had entered the stag's territory and that its aggression was territorial instinct. Others believed the stag, sensing the threat to a vulnerable creature, acted out of an instinctive protective drive, but no one could deny the truth. Emily was alive because of the stag's intervention, and in the eyes of the people, it was nothing short of a miracle. As Emily recovered, gifts poured in from well-wishers, cards, letters, stuffed animals shaped like deer. But none of these meant as much to her as the quiet moments she spent by the window, staring out at the winter forest. She wondered if the stag remembered her, as she remembered it. Did it know it had saved her life? Was it still roaming the snowy woods, wild and free? Her father, seeing her thoughtful expression one evening, sat beside her. "Some things," he said gently, "we're not meant to understand." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining with a mix of wonder and gratitude. "Maybe," she replied, "but I think the stag understood." Her father smiled softly. Maybe it did. Spring came early that year. The snows melted, revealing the scars of winter beneath. Villagers found the clearing where Emily had first encountered the stag. The ground still bore the marks of the struggle. Deep hoof prints, claw marks, churned earth. No sign of the wolves remained, and the stag had moved on, as wild things do. But the memory of its bravery lingered. Emily's story became a local legend, told around fireplaces and in classrooms, passed from one generation to the next. Children grew up hearing about the great deer who protected a child from danger, and adults found renewed respect for the mysteries of nature. The forest was no longer seen as merely a place of threat, but also as a place of unexpected guardianship, a place where, even in the face of fear, courage could rise from the most unlikely of heroes. For Emily, the experience changed her forever. She never forgot the cold, the terror, the desperate sprint through the snow. But most of all, she never forgot the stag. In her heart, she carried the memory of that noble creature, its strength, its bravery, its defiance against the wild. Whenever she saw deer grazing at the forest's edge, she felt a quiet connection. A silent thank you carried on the wind. Because in the deepest part of her soul, she knew. She was alive because of the wild. She was alive because, for a brief, incredible moment, nature itself had chosen to protect her. Weeks passed since Emily's miraculous rescue, yet the echoes of that day lingered in every corner of the village. Even as the last snows melted into rushing streams and green shoots pierced the softening earth, the story remained as fresh as the cold wind that had once sliced through the forest. For Emily, life had slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Her strength had come back. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the shadows of fear that had clouded her eyes began to lift. But she had changed. Everyone could see it. There was a quiet depth to her gaze now, as if she carried within her the wisdom of something far greater than her years. And in truth, she did. Because while her body had healed, her heart still beat with the memory of that moment when she had stood on the brink of death, and nature itself had reached out to pull her back. The story of the brave stag had spread far beyond the frozen edges of her small community. News outlets had carried the tale across the country and even overseas. Wildlife magazines ran special features on the event. Schools used her story to teach lessons about survival and respect for nature, and letters from strangers arrived by the dozens. Messages of awe, of inspiration, of shared wonder. Yet Emily cared little for the fame. She found herself uncomfortable with the attention, not because she disliked people knowing what had happened, but because she believed the true hero of the story had long since disappeared back into the wild. No cameras had captured the stag's charge. No reporters had seen it stand between her and the wolves. Only she had witnessed its courage. Only she had felt its power. And only she understood what it meant. One bright morning, as spring pushed its way fully into the land, Emily walked alone toward the edge of the forest. The warmth of the sun felt strange after so many weeks of winter's chill, and the smell of thawing earth filled the air. Her parents had been hesitant to let her go. Even now, the memory of almost losing her haunted them. But Emily had promised to stay close, and they understood this was something she needed to do. As she stood beneath the budding branches, her eyes swept across the landscape. Gone were the heavy snows and the sharp bite of frost. In their place, life had returned in vibrant waves. Birds sang from hidden nests, squirrels darted between the trees, and along a ridge in the distance, a small group of deer grazed peacefully in the warming sun. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with hope. Among the deer, one stood taller than the rest. Antlers branched like ancient trees from its proud head, and its coat gleamed in the sunlight. Was it the same stag? Her mind told her it was impossible to know, but her heart whispered yes. Yes, it was. She didn't call out. She didn't move closer. Instead, she stood still, allowing the moment to stretch into forever. The stag lifted its head, powerful muscles rippling beneath its hide. For a brief, breathtaking second, its eyes met hers across the open field. They were deep and knowing, ancient as the earth itself. And then, with a quiet grace, the stag turned and disappeared into the forest, leading its herd away into the shelter of the trees. Emily felt no disappointment, no ache of loss, only gratitude, because she knew, deep in her bones, that the stag had seen her, and that it remembered. In the months that followed, Emily's life unfolded in ways she never could have imagined. She spoke at local schools, sharing her story not as a tale of fear, but as one of wonder and respect. She learned about deer, about wolves, about the delicate balance that kept the forest alive. She devoured books on animal behavior, on ecosystems, on how humans could live in harmony with the wild. What had once been a youthful fascination had deepened into a profound calling. She wanted to protect the wilderness that had protected her. Her experience had planted a seed, and it grew steadily with each passing day. Her father, watching her from the porch as she studied wildlife field guides by lamplight, felt a swell of pride. She was always brave, he said quietly to her mother one evening, but now she's something more. Her mother, tears shining in her eyes, nodded. She carries the forest inside her. And it was true. Emily had become a bridge between two worlds. Where others saw only danger, she saw beauty. Where others feared the unknown, she found wonder. And as word of her journey spread, she inspired others to look at the wilderness not with suspicion, but with awe. One autumn day, nearly a year after her encounter, Emily stood once more at the edge of the forest. The air was crisp with the promise of winter's return, and golden leaves drifted down like tiny flames. She had grown taller, stronger. Her eyes were bright, filled with determination. In her hands, she held a small wooden carving, a stag, carefully shaped and polished, its antlers sweeping proudly skyward. She placed it on a rock at the forest's edge, a silent offering of thanks. A breeze stirred the trees, and for a moment she could almost hear the pounding of hooves in the distance, the echo of bravery carried on the wind. Emily smiled, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she turned and walked back toward home, knowing that wherever life took her, the spirit of the forest and the courage of its guardian would always be with her.